Hi, my name is Chad Bergman, and I'm a designer advocate here at Figma. Welcome to the Hidden Layers of Design Systems, where we go beyond the components to have deeper conversations around the underlying side of building, supporting, and evolving design systems. Today we're joined by Jeremy Dizon, who has worked on some design systems for companies such as Airbnb, Lyft, and Disney. Jeremy, thank you so much for being here today. What have you been up to?
Thanks for having me, for one. Been pretty busy. A lot of great system things going on at Disney. A lot of trying to think past just the typical component libraries and templates and things like that. And so it's been a year in the making, but our new system, Icon, is now out, and we're trying to get it in front of folks so they can use and play with.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on that. And, I'd like to just take a moment to think about, you've worked on a few systems and lots of great insights learned across all of those systems and companies, right? And as you've worked on systems, one thing I'm curious is, in your opinion, what should really go into that decision-making process when you're defining what will become an asset that lives in the design system?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of times we don't want to have bespoke things because one team is using it. And so if multiple teams are going to be using a certain component, that's definitely in the wheelhouse to be able to bring into the system. Other things is like, if we notice a team is working on a solution for a component, for an experience, and another team is going through the same motions, like, oh, hey, we need something to solve our problem over here. When we pair those two people together to solve a problem together, automatically that could be a component or something that we can bring into the system, knowing already two teams are going to be using it. And so we look for those types of things in order to kind of add the value in, because if two teams are using it, pretty good chance another team is going to be able to leverage this for their experience, and hopefully whether it solves their problem or gets them to their next solution instead of going back to the drawing board.
And when multiple teams are going to use a component, is it something where they can organically just find they're doing that, or where do you see that you step in and say, hey, wait a moment, this could be a great opportunity to maybe include this in the system?
We've come across it during office hours. I have a lot of one-on-ones with teams, whether it's in a project meeting or whatnot. I'll notice things. We'll notice things, and so that's the opportunity to be like, oh, hey, actually, we know someone else over here is working something similar. Then we'll connect them. Other times it'll just be to our PM or DPM who is like, hey, they need some support on something. And then we can offer, just because we are leveraging and partnering so many teams, that we can actually bring that to the table instead of two teams kind of churning on their own. But again, that's just us trying to be in front of folks. Sometimes there's a lot of teams. Yeah. We don't have that opportunity, and so when we do, it also opens up that door for hey, we have that story now. Oh, hey, we work with this team that we connect these two teams together. Is there something in your realm that we can help with so we can do the same? So that word of mouth helps get more work, but also brings more value to the system.
Cool. So you're really identifying where there's opportunities for parity across those different teams there. They have similar use cases that they're hoping to use something from the system in order to support or solve. I think sometimes we talk about as well, what do we plan for from the development side? Should things match up there? I like to say yes. I sometimes like to say maybe there shouldn't be parity. In your experience working on multiple systems, do you think there are scenarios where not having parity between design development can be just as important as having parity?
Yeah, I think earlier in my career, parity was key, and definitely ensuring that the system resources on the design side mimicked what was in code. Super important, right? That shows the value and the business impact. But now that, looking towards multi-brand, multi-platform kind of world, sometimes it's hard to actually do that in practice. But also too is like, how do we, now we're redefining and kind of focusing on what makes that brand stand out, right? And so those like nuances of a brand may not work for a system, but for that brand, that's the way they can, target or kind of connect with their audiences. And so I'm now evolved to the point, like, maybe it doesn't have to be, but not going off the rails, obviously, but thinking through that kind of scenario where if it's not parity with the system, can we still keep guidelines around it so that like other people can kind of leverage that same thinking to solve their problems and not have just bespoke.
And so having those guidelines where people can maybe have a different brand and maybe they need the system to support in a different way for their particular brand, and maybe another brand can leverage that as well. Obviously that brings in contributions sometimes, and contributions, they can be great, they can be challenging. Curious, having worked and put out an article as well around contributions in the past, where have you found success with contributions? Like, have you found a process that kind of works, or is it really different across all different scenarios?
Yeah, so I believe in contributions. It is definitely not easy. A lot of times it's twice as much work. But the reason why I love contributions so much is because a lot of times you're educating your brand designer partner into becoming more systems thinker. And so even though it takes a lot more time, and this is what I did at Lyft, we walk you through the actual contribution process, and it mimics the systems process to a T. And that was purposeful so that they can understand not only, hey, it takes a lot of work, but also this is what we're doing on our end when you don't see us in these other meetings. Like, we have updates, but this is why a component takes a long time to bring in. If multiple components have been created, we're trying to align it so that it's flexible, has high quality, and things like that. And so that education process, it is definitely one-on-one. But I've noticed from my time at Lyft that people take a lot of like influence from it, and hope, the hope is that they bring it back to their own process as they work on their experience, so that next time it's quicker, or they can help educate their peers as well across other brands or other experiences, or even just their coworkers who they work with constantly.
So something that you said there just around the education piece, and when people are contributing, they're really learning more about the design system process and what goes into it. Now, if someone is making a contribution, whether it's their first or their 10th contribution, maybe they're contributing something and it's not quite up to the quality bar that's set by the system. Now, I'm curious, what does feedback look like when someone is excited to make a contribution and maybe it's not quite ready for the system yet? What does that feedback look like?
Feedback is hard just in general, but as we go through contribution process, we're really walking them through the entire thing and not letting them kind of flail around. And so there's many checkpoints that we can, step in and be like, hey, talk through those quality opportunities. And a lot of times, again, the education aspect is like, I'm always asking them, well, how do we make this more flexible? Or what if another designer wanted to use this component? How could we make it more usable for them, more versatile? And then sometimes we'll bring in engineering to help out with that, like, how they build it. We need to include this in order for it to unlock other things.
Yeah.
And so that really helps to kind of like not just think about the thing in front of us, but also the impact that it can have across the different areas, as well as having them think through that aspect of it. And so I look at it as not just, this this is not ready for prime time. More like, okay, how do we keep pushing? Because at one point we'll have QA, or at one point we'll put it in front of people, and then we'll get more feedback there. So it's also like prepping them for like multiple rounds of feedback, but also like thinking through, and this is how we do it on the system side, is what are all the use cases, what are all the scenarios that we can build into it to make that thing better. And so it's a bread and butter for us, but for our partners who are so fully focused on one experience, that actually broadens their mindset a little bit, and that's great, and I love to see that.
And you mentioned a little bit there around some of the different teams that you work with when you're working on a design system. And I think that when you do work on a design system, right, there's a lot of observation, there's a lot of collaboration, and definitely a lot of communication is needed. And just curious, from your perspective, where are some of the key areas to start building relationships when you are working on a design system?
Oh yeah, it's I think relationships are very key. I also understand that like to do this whole product thing, design and engineering needs to be in lockstep. And so I know I can't build that thing. And so there are some engineers who can design, but like having that focus really helps. And so early and often is what I usually say. When I started at Disney, I was already having one-on-ones with my engineers, just getting to know them, understanding where they're coming from, seeing what the problems that they're having. I did the same thing at Lyft. And so it's not like rocket science, but trying to get on the same page with them is really helpful to be able to understand, okay, how are we going to do this together? And then also, can we trust each other so that when we come up to roadblocks, whether it's within a component, whether it's in process, whatever, can we do this thing together? And so I'm a team aspect of things, and I love working on collaboration and folks like who are that minded as well, because it just makes it more fun, and I think what people don't really understand about systems is that I work on a system. I don't own the system. I'm a steward of that system, and I think everyone has responsibility to maintain, add, do what they may with the system.
Yeah.
And that's not just designers, that's also engineers and PMs and people who, leverage it to build something more efficiently.
As you mentioned, being a steward of the system and getting people bought into it, having the relationships. Can you maybe share just a little bit about how you've used those relationships, or how you recommend even people leverage their relationships to help position the design system in the organization? Like, do you use those relationships to look at the design system as a product you all collaborate on? Is it like an infrastructure piece? What's your opinion there, and how do you use your relationships to help?
Yeah, like I think it's all of those things. Like I see it as we need promoters for the system, and like I can talk at length about the system and like the values of it, but in practice we need our that street team to help facilitate. Hey, I worked with the systems team on this component or whatever, and they're really easy to work with, or they helped me launch this thing way quicker, and not just on the design side, but on the engineering side. Like having that kind of like word of mouth really help kind of disseminate that we're there to support everyone, and that we are valuable for the business and the products. And a lot of times, just thinking about metrics, we can't really track it on our design side, our system side. Like we're trying to connect it with like how quick it was to build that product from ground up with the componentry we have, or the guidelines that we've provided, and these standards that keep the quality high. And so we need those relationships to be able to do that, because we can't just have a tracker of like, oh, how many people are using this component? It's like, well, that's only in design, but what about in code? Like, so the relationships really help flesh out this idea, and hopefully, the valuableness of a system, and not just, again, leveraging not just within the design space with the all our partners, because at the end of the day, it's for everyone and not just one group, because that's how we build a product, and hopefully it's quicker, more efficient, has quality ingrained in it, as well as like as the business changes, how quickly can we add to it, enhance it to match the business.
As we're about to wrap up, just open question for you, based on all of your experience so far, for anyone who's just getting started, maybe they're working on their first design system, or maybe they are approaching a new design system. Any advice that you would give, one piece of advice, if you could only share one thing?
Okay. It is, there's no one size fits all. So you may think that, this is so new. It is all new. Whenever, like, I worked at 3 different places with systems, it's not necessarily the same every time, which I think is a fun challenge. And so you got to find what works, not only within the team, but process with the org, but also like lean into it, because, we can't just, we're going to follow this guideline, we'll follow these rules. And there's great systems out there, but it may not necessarily work for their team or their structure. So good.
Awesome. Definitely approach everything with fresh eyes and fresh perspectives on there. Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Jeremy, thank you so much. It was great chatting with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right.